A consequence of being a chess YouTuber is that a lot of people will send me their games. And you might be thinking, oh Red Panda, that must be such an honor for you. People probably really value your analysis and just want kind, honest feedback. But this isn't about what you want. This is about what I want, which is why I'm gonna roast you. So I've analyzed some games. I've analyzed it without the engine. So we're gonna play a game. If you see a mistake that I made in my analysis, let me know and I'll heart your comment if you're correct. Of course, I've seen all the games already, and here they started with the move pawn g6. Now this person is rated 1100. So I really am a bit confused why they chose to play the modern of all things. Now I'm not an opening purist. You can honestly play whatever you want. But the modern will give you a position where you're down on space, particularly in the center. So it seems to me like pretty difficult to play compared to just like e5 or like c5, but we'll see. So knight f3, and this is actually funny, we can play dragon. But of course instead we see bishop g7, d4. So far no notes. d6 normal. If we don't play d6, it's really hard for us to develop. We can't really put the knight out because it will get kicked by a pawn. So d6, preparing future development, makes a lot of sense. Okay, bishop e3, and here black played a move pawn a6. Now to me this looked super strange, so I checked it with the opening database. This apparently is a line. It just happens to be a really bad one, because this is a move that fundamentally doesn't fight for the center, doesn't develop a piece, and even if we're scared of like some sort of pin, like here if you're scared of bishop e5, now you can just kick the bishop. In that regard, I don't really understand the point of a6, but it has been played. Apparently the theory continues with a4, which is a common move by white in these kinds of structures, where you want to stop your opponent from playing b5 and expanding on the queen side. So instead we play b6. We very quickly reach a position like this, and you should know this is a hippo. So actually we're gonna go for a setup with this pawn here, this bishop here, and this knight here. And still, like, this person's rated 1100. They have like no opening fundamentals whatsoever. When you're in the opening like this, either they knew this line and were like, yeah, I always play the hippo. If that's the case, please get alive. I can't think of a more boring chess player than someone's like, my hobby is playing chess, I always play the hippo. Other hobbies include watching paint dry. It's just complete nonsense. So here white played the move queen d2. It's not a4, so we're allowing black to expand on the queen side with b5. But this move is also very natural. We're forming this battery to eventually trade off the dark square bishops. Black continues the plan with b5. And here we see the move knight to c3. Now in this scenario, when I see b5, I would be still really tempted with the move a4. It's often worth establishing pawn tension like this. And also it's sooner rather than later, because in this position it actually comes with an immediate threat. If we go bishop b7, which looks very natural, there's of course tension between the rooks, so we're defending it. Here we simply, after the trade of rooks, win a pawn. So I would just go a4. But okay, white played knight c3. Okay, black played knight to d7, which is actually a very common idea in these types of positions. Whenever we break in the center, we want to be able to take back without allowing for the queen trade. Also, we reinforce both of these squares. And here white played the move bishop e2, which I hate. Imagine being so scared that you play queen d2 and don't continue with castling queenside. Like, how lame are you? If you're scared of moves like b4, then you don't have your priorities set straight. Black is still uncastled. If they think they can win with moves like this, while we have our entire army developed and our kin brought to safety, then you're not playing chess, you're doing nonsense. Like here, queenside castles after queen d2 is a no-brainer, and the fact that you didn't play it just shows to me that you're scared of nothing, or that you're scared of ghost, which, considering this person's name Blonde Ghost, is actually quite funny. So we see bishop to e2, which I like. Okay, I'm not gonna mark it a dubious move since it's a developing move, but I mean, like, why would you castle short here? Be more ambitious. Okay, so bishop e7, normal move. We're applying some pressure on the e4 pawn, which, considering the only defender is the knight and the knight can be kicked, pretty nice. Now this move I really hate. Using the castle kin side somewhat negates our temporary advantage of a lead in development. Here our pieces are quicker to go into battle, so what we ideally want to do is we want to castle queen side, followed by a pawn storm on the kin side. So here, this is just very timid. We now have a harder time opening up the position, especially on the kin side. Okay, pawn c5. Exactly what we teach beginners. Don't develop pieces, don't castle, and then open up the position for your opponent to attack you. Brilliant play. Here we take, and then knight takes. This move I really don't like. Bishop takes c5. First of all, we have a lead in development. If we're gonna trade all of our pieces, that lead in development is completely negated. Also, we're giving up the bishop pair for no reason. Finally, we are playing against an uncastled king, which is, by the way, 2 moves away from getting castled. So in such situations, we always need to consider central pawn breaks. In this scenario, white simply at e5. This pawn can't be taken because after queen d8, rook d8, this knight is simply handing. But okay, instead we decide to just trade everything and then trade the queens. Because, you know, when we have a fully developed army against an uncastled king, the thing you want to do is trade queens for no reason. Rook takes back, okay. They challenge the open file, knight f6, normal development, very good. And then after this trade, they get control of the file, but we have king c7. We've traded queen, so the fact that the king can't castle is actually not a problem at all. Also, we have control of the open file, but we have no square where we can infiltrate. What else is happening in the position? Black has the bishop pair. So, we had a position where white was clearly better, playing against an uncastled king, leading development and dominant center control. And in just a couple of moves, we went to a position where if anyone is better, it's probably black. You might be thinking, you're exaggerating. I'm not. You know why? Here white played a3, which just completely hands the pawn. Black doesn't see that. They play rook d8 because they are not paying attention either. And these people are not playing chess. They're shuffling pieces around for no clear reason. Rook takes rook, king takes rook, knight e5. Still Hannin. King e8. We are beyond terrified of white trapping their own knight. Where is it going? It can't go here, it can't go here. So here what needs to happen? White has to take back. Now they have an escape square, but we're gonna lose this pawn. Black's simply a lot better after the trade of these pawns. But okay, we defend the pawn that wasn't worth taking. Here there's actually a very simple tactic in this position, and you always need to notice whenever a piece is undefended, and in this case there's even a bishop pointed at it. So a really simple tactic here is knight takes e4. Either way it's taken back, doesn't matter, this knight is Hannin. But okay, we play knight e7, and after these exchanges, king f2. Here black actually played an excellent move. Bishop takes c3. I will actually give this an exclamation mark, because it looks counter-positional. Why are we giving up the bishop? Well, I mean, it's very clear we're damaging the pawn structure, but particularly in this endgame, it's really good, and I'll explain now. So, who stands better here and why? A very simple thing to do in endgames like this is you just look at the quality of the pawn structure, quality of the pieces, and quality of the king. So, let's start by comparing the kings. King activity. Now, at first you might be thinking that both of them are like equally close to the center. They're both on the second rank. While centralization of the king is important, what even better is to bring the king closer to your opponent's weaknesses, which in this case is this broken pawn structure over here. This king has excellent activity after king c6, king b6, king a5, king a4. Defending this pawn is really hard. If they do so by walking the king all the way up here, then our king is way better positioned than their king. So king activity, black absolutely wins that. It's really close to target and some weaknesses. Bishop activity, about equal. You could argue that this is the bad bishop, but considering these pawns can still be pushed, you can't speak of having a bad and good bishop yet. Like I said, these bad and good bishops, this is only really an aspect of the position if the center is closed. And finally, we compare pawn structure, and this is very clear. We have 2 pawn islands, white has 3, especially these pawns are very weak. All of those things combined tell us that black stands better. So here in this position, black played the move pawn c4, which I think is really poor technique. In an endgame of both light square bishops, you don't want to fix your pawns on light squares. How do you actually win endgames? Well, one of the most important things is king activity. So like I said, king c6, king b6, king a5. So the first thing ideally you want to do is you want to put your pieces on optimal squares. That's very important in an endgame. And also you need to play to your own strengths. In this case, what's strong about your position or what's weak about white's position are these pawns. Combining those ideas, we should bring the king over. White brings the king further to the center, which is a good move. And we go king e6, which is just the wrong way. There's a 4-on-4 on the king side, meaning that no matter what we try, nothing's gonna happen. Like, neither of us is gonna get a passer here. Black here is better. You should really be able to identify this considering the broken pawn structure. When you're better in chess, play to your advantages. So that is not king e6. White here decides to push some pawns on the king side. I think they want to put all the pawns on dark squares so that this bishop becomes more active, which isn't a bad plan. Possibly just continuing the centralization of your king, or at least some sort of infiltration might be more useful, but it's fine. Pawn f5, horrible move. Why are we playing on this side of the board? f5 only makes our pawn structure worse. They take, we take with the king, and what has happened after f5? We've managed to split our pawns. We've only created weaknesses for ourselves. Don't create weaknesses if there's no point. Bring your king over. This is horrible. e5, which is practically speaking a good move. We've damaged our pawn structure, so let's repair it by trading off the isolated pawn. And now h4. This is actually good technique, putting all your pawns on dark squares. And black simultaneously shows bad technique, putting all their pawns on light squares. Here after h6, instead, and, well, let's say they just try and activate their bishop. Maybe g5, maybe this is still okay. It at least keeps the king side in some sort of equilibrium. But after h5, practically, I don't think we have winning chances anymore. Yes, white still has a slightly damaged pawn structure, but like all of these pawns are now potential targets to the bishop, so I really think we've blown it by now. But then white, in their brilliance, decided to trade the light square bishops. I have no idea why they played this. They played beautifully to strengthen their bishop and weaken black's. So then why would you trade it after having done all this work? Thanks to black, put in all their pawns on light squares. We have such an easy time holding this draw. Why would you trade the light square bishops? What is the point? Black of course takes, we take back. Black is completely winning. But then they play a5, which is so stupid. The basics, and I mean the basics of king and pawn endgames is opposition. So why don't you play king f5? Guess what? This position is already Zugzwang. White can't make progress, meaning that they need to abandon the g4 square. We can play g5, takes, and if the king berates around, we can simply enter, and there's nothing white can do. If you think, oh, I'm gonna stop them from getting into g4 by playing king f3, I just go here, now you still need to move, I'm gonna enter. King goes to f2, king h3, we're just bodying this king away from the protection of this pawn. If the king decides to keep defending, king h2. And you might be thinking, wait, isn't this slightly weird? Aren't we just allowing a bit too much here? Well, very simple. Take, slide the king over, and we are closer to targeting these pawns than white is to targeting a6. So in this position, we're very easily winning. This king has to move somewhere. We're gonna take all these pawns. We're gonna promote. So, opposition, basic king and pawn endgames. I don't care that you're 1100. This is so fundamental to chess that you should drill this concept in. Opposition. Also, whenever you play a king and pawn endgame afterward and you see that the engine tells you that you are winning, losing, or drawing at some point, and that wasn't the result, turn off that engine and analyze that game to death, because this is so important for your chess improvement. But okay, a5, and now simply there's no progress to be made. We shuffle and we get a draw. Bradchick, go practice your king and pawn endgames. Okay, next game. So last game was 1100, now we're going up in the rating pool a little bit to 1900 versus 1900, so this should be fun. So we see the move pawn e3, pawn d5, c4 and pawn c6, very common move. We take and we end up in some sort of exchange slot, especially after the move pawn d4. Remember when I said this was going to be interesting? I take it back. So knight to c6, knight to c3, and we end up in this very symmetrical-esque position. Now here black played the move pawn e6, which is practically a pretty normal decision. After bishop f5, developing the bishop outside of the pawn chain, there are two moves you could be slightly scared of. Maybe some sort of queen b3, but in this scenario it really isn't that scary, considering we can simply play rook b8, and now this is protected, so we kind of just ball their queen here for no reason. The other scenario is that they were potentially a bit scared of bishop e5, which in my eyes seems more believable, because it kind of looks like here the move knight e5 is coming in. The spin is quite annoying to deal with. So that's why black here probably played the move e6. Now this entire line isn't that scary, there's always bishop d7 to break the pin. Okay, well, fair enough. White develops the bishop to d3, and here black plays the move pawn a6, which really confuses me. I thought the reason why we closed off the bishop was because we were scared of this pin. So why would we first close off our bishop, which is a drawback, and then spend the time to defend the b5 square after white already moved the light square bishop? This move makes so little sense. I am generally can't comprehend why this would be played. Also, if we were committed to a6, why not play a6 here at the very least? This seems more like a solution if you're really scared of this pin, that you can then develop this bishop here afterwards. But whatever. So we castle and bishop to d6. This is an inaccuracy. I don't really mind that black didn't know this, because it looks like the bishop is quite active here. But in structures like this, the bishop usually stands a little bit better on e7, because it won't be hit by future tempi. That's something you kind of have to know. Okay, rook e1. Actually a very excellent move. White realizes that they should open up the e-file. They're not scared of this pawn potentially being isolated, because they recognize that in doing so they gain a superior position. This bishop will be passive for quite a long time. We will obtain a very strong IQP, and honestly, breaking in the center in positions like this is just really strong, especially considering this bishop is misplaced and we have maybe a slight lead in development, especially if black has to react to this. Black here saw the move rook to e1 and they said to themselves, okay, white is preparing the move e4. Why don't I make it stronger? Also, we're in the opening. Why are you shuffling this piece out for no reason? Also, going away from the the center while your opponent has very active central play. This is still not how you play chess. So e4. Beautiful move. This tells me you have good understanding of dynamism and you are correctly evaluating that this isolated pawn is a strong asset for you. Beautiful. Pawn takes pawn. This is not something you'd ideally want to do. We're giving up our most advanced central pawn, which means that we'll have a disadvantage in the center. But actually, despite it being an unhappy move to make, it is the best move in this position because literally everything else simply loses material. Not a move you'd want to play, but a move you're forced to play. Okay, knight takes back, and here the move bishop b8, which just simply abandons the full king side. Like, there are no pieces here, which should give you a little hint that if the king were to castle, it won't entirely be safe there. And because we have this rook on this file, the king is probably not too safe in the center either. So this move is horribly counter-positional. With a massive attack brewing on the king side and a half-open e-file, we of course bring our most powerful piece away from the attack to a4, where it does nothing. If you want to play something here, probably knight g5, opening up the queen to come to this side of the board. Castling here would be a horrible mistake, because we can simply sacrifice this piece. This is a monster discovery, and here we just get queen h5, and isn't that a beautiful checkmate? Holy smokes. So of course castling would be a massive blunder. You can just take, and if instead you go, oh, I'm really clever, I'll play pawn h6. Oops. And this is dynamic understanding in chess. This king is uncastled. We've moved all our pieces away from the defense of the king. Why don't I sacrifice? And by the way, if you think this is some sort of really hard to find combination, once you see that this check can be delivered, that should be to you a giveaway that this is a good sacrifice. Like, it's not much deeper than that. Like, I don't know, like king e7 is forced. Maybe we can already play d5. I assume the best thing they can do is try to keep the position closed, but I mean, like, this is depressing. But okay, instead I play queen a4, black now gets to castle, and bishop f4, which is not a good move. It just hands a bishop in one move. I mean, I kind of get it. It is pretty uncommon that the bishop stands on b8 in white's defense. However, like, for a 1900s, this is like an inexcusable mistake, of course. So they take pawn d5, which also just hands a pawn in one move. That being said, you kind of feel like you have to do something. So I mark this as a blunder because it hands a pawn for no reason. That being said, I kind of understand the sort of emotional reaction. You're kind of disappointed that you blundered a bishop for no reason. So you're like, do something active. It's not a good reaction to have, but it's a very human reaction. Okay, pawn takes pawn, knight goes to c3, pawn d4. And like I said here, like, we've kind of given up the pawn for no reason. We take, they take, we take, bishop h6, rook d1. This is a very, very clever try. You need to have eyes on this discovery. So here, black played the move knight f6, completely missing the idea. And like I said, at the 1900 level, this is not a mistake you should be making anymore. So we just kind of won the rook for no reason. Now, black is in check, only legal move, and of course we bring the other rook. This is a threat, white's of course completely winning. This next game, both people were rated 2000. So the game started with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, normal stuff, and here we see the Ruy Lopez. Like, I think you can play the Ruy Lopez on almost every level, and you'll get like really interesting games. So we had to play a6. This is known as Morphy's defense. It was discovered actually by Paul Morphy himself. The whole idea being that after this exchange, this pawn is of course not capturable. Everyone, including a grandmother, has seen this already here. Queen d4 attacks both pieces. Fun fact, you could also take with this pawn, because here I believe queen g5 is just another fork, which not a lot of people know about. A lot of people think here that you take with the d pawn, because then you're defending this pawn, but actually both ways defend the e5 pawn tactically. Just the reason we take with the d pawn is because we want to keep our pawn islands together. This splits the pawns, and we accelerate the development of our light square bishop. But that's just a fun little side note. Bishop a4 was played in the game. Now, classically speaking, it was understood that the bishop here was slightly misplaced in the Ruy, because it's very liable to being attacked by tempo, since usually white is a bit quicker to challenge the center than compared with the Italian. Also, there are some variations where you want to put the pawn on c5. That being said, like, for years and years and years now, it's been understood that this variation is very healthy and normal too. Okay, white decides to castle. This is actually inaccurate. Let me flip the board real quick. c3 here's theory. Now, of course, no one really understands all the little intricate move orders of the Ruy Lopez, but castling here is a slight waste of time. After the move, let's say knight f6, we can immediately play the move d4. Now, to a lot of people here, it might look like we're simply blundering the pawn on e4. Very common idea in the Spanish here is the move e5. I believe something like this was featured in the the World versus Judith Polgar match. This is of course a horrible position for black. Here we don't even have to rush with taking back, since after the move castles there's actually a pin. And let's say they castle or something, and we can take. Here we have a superior center. We have some attacking ideas via bishop c2, queen d3. And all in all, this is just a very pleasant position for white. Let's say we continue bishop a7, knight c3. If this exchange happens, this is a really beefy center to start an attack with. Let's say we do nonsense like h6, then bishop c2, pawn d6. And here we already have some sacrifices. This is of course nonsense what I'm showing you, but just to show that like with a beefy center like this and a dominant space advantage, particularly on the king side, with the really strong knight square bishop still in play, your position can just really quickly collapse. Okay, instead we see castles, which is of course fine as well. Black here plays the move d6. Now we play c3, b5, and bishop e3. Now this might seem a bit weird to a lot of people, because very commonly in the Spanish, the bishop will retreat to c2, where it protects the e4 pawn, and it gets out of the way of the knight. However, if you look at variations where the knight goes to a5, what is the point of this move? Very often you want to follow this up with the move pawn c5. However, because the bishop is here, we simply can't do that. And after we move the bishop back here, we're just a bit quicker. Either a4, d4, whatever. Like if I set up the mainline Spanish, you have the Braille variation with knight b8. You have the Chigorin, knight a5. Like the point of knight a5 isn't as much to score a tempo against the bishop. The whole point is to move the c-pawn. Here it's of course kind of obvious that you can't get that move in, so knight a5 is just not a good idea. Meaning that the bishop actually is very well placed here on b3, compared to c2 where it controls a slightly shorter diagonal. And here we see bishop g4, bishop d5. I don't quite understand this move. It has some ideas for sure. I thought simply h3 is a lot better. Now I need you to understand why h3 is such a good move. Every decision that black makes with this bishop gives white something. If you trade, white gets the bishop pair. If you go back here, we've essentially just scored a free tempo with h3 and we've made Luft for the king. If the bishop goes here, what have we gained? Well, the bishop stands on a shorter diagonal. It no longer controls all of these squares. Everything that black can do to meet the move h3 gives white something, which is why very often h3 is played, because it forces black to commit to a diagonal. So it's very often, it's almost an automatic move. There are of course exceptions, particularly when taken is really good. And there are some scenarios where h3 is bad if the kings are castled on opposite side, because then it can be a hook for a pawn storm. Okay, we saw bishop d5, which, I mean, it makes some sense. We're attacking the knight. Black played the move knight e7. Now this looks natural, but it's one of the most common two-move tactics in e4, e5. Pause the video if you want to find it, to be honest. It's really simple. The move is bishop f7. This is just one of the most common tactics. King takes, knight g5, and we take the bishop on the next move. Let's say here and here. Queen d7 is just a completely adequate defense. So yeah, knight e7, instead of that d4 is played, here black decides to take. Now, of course, bishop f7 is still a thin, but like they take, you take back automatically, of course. Oh, I forgot to flip it back to the black pieces, apologies. And here we take. Here white does find the strongest move, bishop f7, which is really nice. It is about time. King takes, knight g5, king g8. Okay, so first of all, the king is often quite poorly placed on this diagonal, especially when it can be liable to some sort of future check. But already to show, black is actually quite lucky here that queen b3 doesn't work to do d5. If that isn't the case, you are just getting checkmated. Black plays queen e8, white here plays the move knight d6, which to me looks clunky. Queen d7, and we have actually successfully established the pin. The way I would have played this, probably queen e6 first. The king moves. Now f7 is a focal point, which is a square next to the king where a mate can be delivered. It is of course protected. Now we have to move queen b3, which prepares against h6, because h6 now simply loses because we free the e6 square. It is of course very clear to see that we're completely losing. I mean, I think we even have a windmill, like knight d4, the king has to move, we give check again. Like, technically you could flee to h7, but even then, like, just take and we're up a piece. So okay, knight e6 seems to me like an inferior move. Now queen d7, like I said, there is the spin. White played queen h3, and I'm really sure that this is not what white had in mind when they played the move knight e6. Here black played the move pawn h6, then we see knight c3, black decides to take, we take back. Black plays the move knight e5, which is simply just not a good move. Why is this not a good move? Well, I don't really know what the knight is doing here, except for the fact that it's running into tempo with f4. Since, you know, now we have f5, which just cements this piece into place. Now, what's actually going on in this position? Our king is feeling somewhat exposed compared to the white king, right? But black's position has some upsides in an endgame. endgame because we have the superior pawn structure. Both of those things should tell us that we should aim to trade the queens. Now there's a pin still. This knight can't move anywhere with check, so to me the move knight d8 seems very logical. Here we're of course threatening to take, so the knight has to move, after which we can trade the queens. And this position, it is sometimes difficult to evaluate endgames like this. I would say black probably has a slight edge because of the superior pawn structure. But okay, we play knight e5, pawn f4 was played, really strong move. This side now goes to g6 and of course f5. In the last couple moves, black has allowed white to first of all cement the knight in on e6. Second of all, open the rook's vision on the f-file a bit more, you know, maybe some future rook lift. And finally, to simply gain space on the king side, which will aid you in any king side attack. Okay, black of course plays the move knight f8, and here white saw a beautiful little combination with the move knight g7. Yeah, after king takes, pawn f6, king h7, and here we simply have to checkmate, queen h6, king g8, queen g7 mate. So here of course white delivered the checkmate. No, I'm kidding, they traded queens. Yeah, why would you checkmate if instead you can just trade queens for no reason? Very good. Black played the move knight e5. I don't understand why we wouldn't just win the pawn over here. Like rook f7 isn't really a defensive try because this check is completely meaningless and in fact just allows our king to centralize. This rook has to move somewhere and we take the pawn. Very good. Okay, rook f6. Now this is just really poor technique. Why would we help the black king centralize for no reason? This rook just has to move again. Okay, rook e8. We go after this pawn. Here I play the move bishop f4, which makes some sense. We take, and then we trade some pieces here. Now, this endgame. Who is better and why? This, of course, should be a draw. Because in these sort of rook endgames, you actually do need a lot of advantages to get a win. That being said, it isn't simple. White is first to occupy the open file, and therefore should have at least decent chances to pose problems to black. And they play the move rook d1, which is to me the only good move in the position. If you play any other move, let's say king f2, now rook d8, and here white has a slightly worse pawn structure. They don't have the open file. Here you play the move king f6. This move actually shows good technique. It continues centralizing the king while preventing rook d7 from coming with tempo. Okay, rook d7 anyway, pawn c5, very normal. Rook d6, king g5, and here a move that to me makes very little sense, rook a6. Now we are of course taking a free pawn, but something I need you to understand is that material in these endgames isn't as important as you might think. What is a lot more important is that we get our pieces as active as possible first. Here what I would do, I would play a move like king f2. Why? First of all, before I go grab pawns and surrender control of the file, I would love to control the infiltration squares from the black rook. Let's say we give a meaningless check. Here our king can continue going in. Let's say after a random move, now we can take on a6, because if you occupy the open file, there isn't really a good infiltration point. Now, of course, black doesn't have to give the check, but I think it's just good technique to first centralize the king and accumulate some advantages before going on a pawn hunt. This allows black to control the open file. And now, even though white has won a pawn, black has very clear compensation. The file is open and there's some weaknesses we can target. Okay, rook a5, we're going after more material. King f4, good move. b5. And here we play the move king e3, which, I mean, it's very cheeky. We threaten mate in one. That being said, we can probably just give the check and then like win some material back. And this might look complicated. It looks like this pawn falls and the 2-on-1 will decide, but white is in this mate in net. Here they kind of have to move the cheap pawn and then we can take on h2 to defend everything. Now that is really complicated to see, but if nothing else, even like king e4 to me makes more sense than king e3. King e3, it seems a bit sneaky, but ultimately like white just moved the h pawn and then like we go back and like what have we really accomplished here? Also, what I don't understand is why we went back to f4 instead of just taking the pawn. Okay, white took the pawn, the king goes in here. Like we really focused on these mate in net tactics, but this is not going to work. Just king f1, we give a check, we go after some pawns. Here this endgame seems to have sort of spiraled out of control. You take on g2 and like, okay, we're holding this pawn, but we're quite passive. White has these passes, so this should be quite an easy win. And here very slowly white decides to convert the game. Rook g4. And you know what? Here I feel really bad for the white pieces because they play the move pawn c6. And like so I've trash talked a lot. But this is actually like I don't know the time control this game was played in. I can see like this happening because this just feels awful. The whole point is the black king has no moves. This pawn has no moves. So we have some stalemating tricks. This is just stalemate. I tried to figure out if there was some way for white to escape, but like this is just a stalemate. Like the white king can't escape. And yeah, after some more shuffling, white just kind of took the rook. So well, they traded queens for no reason when they had a mate in game too, but apart from that, they played really well. And then it's just unfortunate that here they just got stalemate trapped, which, yeah, that's just painful, and that happens. What was the point of this video? Was it for you to learn? No, absolutely not. The point was for me to roast you. I have probably failed. That will be all. YouTube thinks you like this video, so I worked hard on it. Maybe give it a try, and I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.